and when you feel as if you'd like to play something a little bit scary. For 33 years, Fred Rogers made children feel safe on TV. But after he died in 2003, his wife Joanne revealed something nobody knew. Every year on his birthday, Fred wrote a letter to God. He questioned whether his work mattered and if he was doing enough. He kept over 30 of those letters locked away, asking Joanne to keep them private while he was alive. But that wasn't the only thing he hid. In 1986, he wrote a manuscript so raw that publishers refused to print it. What Fred Rogers kept hidden will leave you in shock. Fred Rogers was born on March 20, 1928 in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. His father, James, had just built a mansion with heated floors and a private elevator. His mother, Nancy, came from a banking family. Despite all this wealth, Fred spent his early years mostly alone. Their estate had 47 acres, but it felt empty. His father was rarely home, working long days at the steel plant. And even with 3 servants around, Fred just wanted someone to talk to. That deep loneliness made him crave emotional closeness more than toys or luxury. At age 2, Fred got both measles and scarlet fever during the Great Depression. It was a terrifying time. 15% of children in Pennsylvania who got both illnesses didn't survive. Fred was stuck in bed for 47 days. His fever went above 104 deg and he began hallucinating. But during those long nights, his mother sat beside him every day. She taught him how to play melodies on the black piano keys because the fever had left his fingers too weak for the others. Each black key was an emotion. That piano became his first real friend. When he turned 3, Fred couldn't tie his shoes or even use a fork properly. Doctors said he had severe developmental dyspraxia and might never improve. One doctor suggested he should be sent away to an institution, but his parents hired a physical therapist named Margaret Thompson. She brought puppets to therapy and made Fred's fingers dance by making the puppets move. Within 6 months, Fred's hand coordination improved by 300%. He still needed Velcro shoes until age 12, but he never forgot how something fun like puppetry helped him heal. That same year, on September 15th, a train derailed just 400 YD from their home. Fred stood at his window and saw the wreck. 47 people died. His father told him they were just sleeping. But Fred learned the truth when he read a newspaper headline. The horror stayed with him. He asked his mother, "Why do people get hurt when they're just trying to go somewhere?" It became one of the core questions he tried to answer in his later work. By the time he was 5, Fred spent hours alone in the attic using old socks to perform puppet shows. He gave each puppet a voice and a story. His audience was a row of stuffed animals. One day his mother walked in and saw him conducting what looked like a classroom. She was so moved. She had aerial puppet theater made for him, complete with red velvet curtains and lights. He named his favorite puppet David the Dreamer. The themes he explored back then, fear, kindness, belonging, would later appear in every episode of his show. At age 6, Fred was baptized. His grandmother gave him a set of handmade felt-board Bible stories. She didn't shy away from tough questions. When Fred asked, "Why does God let kids suffer?" she answered, "God wants us to wonder." They had these conversations every week for 4 years. She taught him that asking was part of faith. That belief would later define how Fred talked to children about life, never pretending to have all the answers, but always showing he cared. In high school, Fred was bullied. He was tall but skinny with a high voice, and kids called him Squeaky. One day, 3 football players shoved him into a locker during a lunch. No one punished them. He tried playing piano at assemblies, but the crowd mocked him and threw paper planes. Once they poured chocolate milk on his sheet music, he began seeing a therapist. His mother almost moved him to another school, but Fred stayed, quietly building his resilience. When he was 15, hay fever made him miss almost half the school year. While stuck at home, he composed his first full piece of music. It was called Melody for String Quartet in D minor. It had 247 measures and was so complex that his teacher couldn't believe he wrote it. When it was performed publicly, his classmates laughed and called it funeral music, but Fred kept writing. The piece is still kept in the Fred Rogers archive. His relationship with his father was strained. James Rogers had survived the 1918 Spanish flu, but never dealt with the trauma. He wanted his son to be strong, to run the steel business. Fred just wanted to create. In his diary, Fred wrote, "It's been 23 days since he asked how I felt." On his 17th birthday, Fred broke a window while practicing with puppets. His father grounded him for a month, banned piano, and made him work at the steel yard. His hands blistered so badly he couldn't play for 3 weeks. Later, James gave Fred an ultimatum. Stop the puppet nonsense or find your own way. Fred chose his own way. When his brother Jim was born in 1937, Fred was 9. He didn't handle it well. He hid the baby's bottles and refused to speak for 6 weeks. Psychologists were brought in. Fred only communicated through notes and drawings, some of them disturbing. He admitted years later, "I wanted Jim to disappear so you would love me again." That guilt never left him. It helped shape his mission to make every child feel seen and valued. In 1945, Fred volunteered for civil defense. His job was to watch the skies for enemy bombers. One night in March, radar picked up a possible threat. Fred stood on a rooftop for 4 hours believing an attack was coming. It turned out to be American planes, but the fear was real. He started having nightmares about fire from the sky. That's when he decided he would never include violence in anything he created for children. He transferred to Rollins College in 1948 to study music. He graduated magna cum laude in 1951. He was deeply involved in choirs, music clubs, even intramural swimming. He won several awards, but during one performance his girlfriend mocked his stutter in front of others. Fred was crushed. To fix it, he taught himself breath control by speaking underwater. That's how he developed his slow, careful speech. It wasn't natural. It was built from struggle. After graduation, he worked in television and studied theology at lunch. In 1963, he was ordained not to preach in a church, but to serve children through television. His friend Reverend Bill Barker helped make that happen. Fred believed a TV show could be a form of ministry, a place where children could feel safe and understood. His most famous early song was "Let's Be Together Today," written in 1950. He used musical tension to reflect emotional conflict. He could hear any tune and replay it instantly. He composed over 200 songs, often with jazz pianist Johnny Costa. Even as a kid, Fred played carols on loudspeakers for his neighborhood. Music was always how he connected. In seminary, Fred had a secret. He played jazz piano at underground clubs, earning $5 a night. His religious upbringing frowned on secular music, so he kept it hidden. But that jazz background gave his songs their richness. Beneath the calm surface of Mr. Rogers was an artist who took risks. He met Joanne at Rollins in 1948. She was on the welcome committee. They didn't know much about love, but they grew together. In 1952, Fred proposed through a handwritten letter. She was so excited she lost the letter running to a pay phone to say yes. They were both 24 when they married, and their 50-year marriage was the anchor that held everything together. Fred Rogers landed his first big break in television in 1951, just 23 years old, working at NBC in New York. He thought he'd finally made it. But that excitement didn't last. He worked behind the scenes on shows like The Kate Smith Hour and The Gabby Hayes Show. But what disturbed him the most was what passed as entertainment for children. He watched grown adults throw pies in each other's faces while kids laughed in the audience. And something about that just didn't sit right with him. It wasn't just silly, it felt wrong. The breaking point came fast. After only 6 weeks, Fred walked out. He told everyone he had seen enough. This was supposed to be his dream, but it turned into something he couldn't stand to be a part of. 3 years later in Pittsburgh, Fred got another chance. This time he started something from scratch. In April 1954, he co-created a small children's show called The Children's Corner on WQED. The entire show ran on just $150 a week, split between Fred and his co-host Josie Carey. They didn't even have proper materials. Fred had one yellow legal pad to plan an entire year's worth of content. The studio was a mess. Fred had to run from the puppet stage to the organ and back again during live broadcasts, which is why he switched to wearing sneakers. The puppets weren't even part of the original plan. Daniel Tiger was born the night before the station launched, made from a sock handed to him by the station manager. Fred ended up voicing all 13 puppet characters live every day, making up dialogue on the spot. Josie never knew what was coming next, and somehow it all worked. By 1955, Fred decided he wanted something special to move across the screen, a tiny red trolley. But there was no money for fancy props, so he built it himself from scraps. The entire thing cost just $18. It was only 1.5 in long, and Fred used tweezers and a magnifying glass to glue every little part into place. Then he operated it live alongside all the puppets while still running to the organ. One day, after filming a long episode about sharing, Fred collapsed from exhaustion right there on the studio floor. That's how much he gave to the show. He'd been married to Joanna since 1952, but all this pressure was starting to weigh on their relationship. In 1956, something happened that Fred would carry with him for the rest of his life. In the middle of an argument about how poorly the show was doing, Fred smashed one of his puppets. Just like that, gone. It was completely unlike him. They weren't the kind of couple that shouted, but this time, things broke. Years later, he used that very moment, his outburst, the guilt, as a way to teach children about managing their own anger. Even with all the stress, Fred kept creating. By 1957, he had written over 200 original songs for the show, including one tune that would become iconic, "Won't You Be My Neighbor?" He wrote it after getting a letter from a child who felt alone. Fred played every song on a baby grand piano he pulled out of a Pittsburgh junkyard. He fixed it up and brought it to life. And when he came home from stomach cancer surgery years later, the first thing he did was sit at that piano and play. Over time, he wrote 13 full operas for kids, all while barely sleeping and holding the entire production together by sheer will. Then in 1958, Pittsburgh flooded. One episode focused on the flood and what it meant for the community. The response was overwhelming. Fred received 500 letters that week alone. Most of them were from kids who had lost pets. Fred cried reading them, not in private, on air. He read their stories with tears running down his face. And then he did something nobody expected. He personally wrote back to every single child. In 1963, he took another risk. He left the U.S. and moved to Canada to start a show called Miscarriages on CBC. It ran for nearly